Hello, my sunshines. I am so glad you're here. This is your session with me, Dr. Deborah Brown, and I'm so glad you're here today. We have an exciting topic. How are you? So it's been a while. I know we've moved to every other week for our podcast. We've been doing so much fun stuff over here that it just is what we've decided just in the nature of the time that we have to put things together. We have a lot of exciting things planned for this podcast. So we need some time to get them all together. So one of the things we're talking about is maybe at some point some guests. So if you have any suggestions on anybody you'd like us to have on, let us know. But for now, you're going to see me every other week. And that's what we do in therapy. When you're doing okay, we space it out a little bit more. So, our topic today is boundaries and limits. And I called this living a self oriented life. And the reason that I'm using that language is because a lot of us feel like when we try to do things about ourselves that we're selfish. And what we're going to talk about today is about how to be self oriented. Boundaries and limits are a very big part of that. And there's a reason why we struggle with being self oriented and doing things for ourselves. And most of it is because we're good people, because we're kind, because we have empathy. And that's why we struggle sometimes with boundaries and limits because our empathy gets us in trouble. So, I am doing this for all the people who are over explaining, people pleasing, approval seeking, afraid of rejection people. Sounds awful, like I just called you out, right? I called you an over explaining, people pleaser, approval seeking, afraid of rejection person. The truth of it is that a lot of us who are kind and have empathy suffer with a lot of those things at the wrong level. I want you to be kind. I want you to get the approval of others. Of course, we want other people to validate us. It's not wrong. But the problem is when you get very caught up in the needs of other people, you lose a little bit of yourself and maybe a little bit of your kindness and your empathy. A lot of us who are exhausted and overwhelmed and overburdened are that way because we probably give a little too much to other people. And that's what boundaries are really about, is about, are you giving too much to people that you really need for you? You know, if you're so busy honoring the expectations and the needs of others, where are your needs and your aspirations? That's why we're going to talk about boundaries, because if you keep giving more than you should or allowing more than you should in your life for others, you're not self oriented and you're going to lose that kindness and that empathy when you get tired. So, first, let's define this. One of the things that I always laugh about is I'll talk to people about boundaries, and then halfway through the conversation, they'll say, What are boundaries? And it's always so funny because it's like you let me go on about this and didn't even let me explain what it is. This is the problem with things like social media and the readings that we do out there on the internet, is that we hear a lot of terms and they're not really defined properly. And sometimes we even use those terms or overuse those terms wrong. And you'll hear a lot of people out there talking about being with a narcissist or in a toxic relationship and gaslighting. And a lot of those terms aren't used correctly and they're overused. So we're going to talk about some of those concepts today too and what they mean. So let's define boundaries. So my definition is that this is the boundaries are the needs and expectations about how you want to live your life and how you want to be treated. So let's say that again. Boundaries are the way that you set rules around the needs and expectations that you have about how you want to live your life and how you want to be treated. It's not just about relationships. It's mostly about how you set them with other people. But this conversation is also going to be about how you decide what they even are for you. Some of the problems that people have with boundaries are really about other people, about being with people who don't have enough empathy, or being in toxic relationships, or being with people that take from you. But sometimes it's about you. It's about you naturally giving more as a habit, as a pattern, and believing that that's the best way to be. And I want you to give. I want you to share. I want you to be kind. I want you to be empathic. But I don't want you to pour from the cup when the cup is empty. And that's a good way of thinking about boundaries, right? Also, a good way of thinking about limits. So, limits are sort of what helps us understand what our boundaries are. So, limits are the non negotiable line that you must not pass. Everyone has them. We are we are a cup that gets empty and we have to learn how to fill it up again. But a limit is where you pour from the cup and the cup is empty. So think about in my world. In my world, we have a lot of demand for therapy, but I have limits. I can't see 15 people in a day. So my hard line is this is how many I'm going to see. And I'm allowed to have a limit. So if I want to set a boundary around that, I only open up so much on my schedule. So limits and boundaries sometimes are things you need to think about for you because people will take from you. And we want to make sure you're not giving them the opportunity to do that. So boundaries and limits become the way that you control what you're able to give. You can't cut off pieces of yourself and hand them to other people because eventually there'll be nothing left of you. And I know a lot of people that do that, and they do it in a lot of ways, and it's exhausting. So, the reason this conversation is so important is because I have to have this with a lot of people in therapy. Do you have good boundaries? And they go, yeah, sure. I go to the gym. I get to sleep at night. No, 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 no. Are you getting what you're giving from other people, or are you giving too much? So, let's think about who we need boundaries around or what we need boundaries around. So, where are we giving too much? We need them around our partner. We need them around our friends. We need them around our family, usually for sure. And we need them around work. And we need them sometimes even around our children. So, every part of your life, you have to define what's the limit here? How do I behave in these situations in a way that respects who I am as a person? And there's a funny example that I like to use when I talk about boundaries, and the example is your pets. Pets are a place where most of us are pretty good with boundaries. So I have two cats, and my limit is I do not want cats on the table or on the counter in my house. That's my limit. So my boundary is if you get up there, you're going to get squirted with a water gun. Cruel and unusual punishment, I know. But it's one of those things that's my limit. I don't want that. I don't want cat hair all over places where we cook food, right? So that's a boundary that's real easy for me to maintain. When the cat goes up there, I ask them to get off. They do it again, they get squirted. So that's a clear boundary. That was easy. I don't have to worry about what the cat thinks or feels. I just do that. And after a while, the cat doesn't usually get up on those places anymore. That's an easy example of how we can set a boundary with success. But keep in mind, the cat doesn't have an opinion. Cat doesn't usually argue too hard. People are different. People push back, and people will take as much as you give them and more. So, the example of the pet is a good one because it clarifies why we need that boundary and that we have consequences if a person crosses a cat, if a cat crosses the boundary. But it's not so easy with people. It's a lot more work. Setting boundaries takes persistence, patience, resilience, and really being able to say, this is my limit, this is my line, and then holding that line even when somebody pushes back. So, can you set boundaries on other people's behaviors? Can you tell other people what to do? It's interesting, there was a survey in 2023 asking that very question. Can you set a boundary around someone else's behavior? And 42% of people said no. And my opinion is that those 42% of people are wrong. You have to set boundaries around the way other people behave around you. This isn't about controlling someone or telling someone what they can and can't do. It's about making sure that you're not surrounded with things that hurt you or take from you. 42% of people don't think boundaries about other people's behavior are okay. Are those 42% overwhelmed and exhausted and taken advantage of? Possibly. So boundaries, what are they not? They're not a shield. They're not a self-protection. When we set them the first time, when I talk to people, sometimes we're doing it because we're protecting people. But we really shouldn't have relationships with people that we need to be shielded from or protected from. So, yeah, we need to set boundaries if that's happening. But we also need to consider, if we have to set this many boundaries, is this a healthy relationship for us? So, yes, healthy relationships need boundaries. But once those boundaries are set, the relationship is healthy. It shouldn't be self-protection, and it shouldn't be a shield. Now, if we're talking about a partner relationship, that makes sense. Families are a little different because some of us have family members that we really do need to protect ourselves and shield ourselves from. Boundaries are a start, but distance is also another part of that. If you have a family member who is hurting you or making you uncomfortable, you need to not be near them. And when you are near them, that's when the boundaries come in too. But your boundary might be, I'm not going to spend time with this person. So boundaries are self-directed, but sometimes they're in response to what other people do. Both those aspects are important. If somebody hurts you, you need to put up a boundary so they don't hurt you again. But you decide what that is, not them. And that's not selfish. It's not selfish to say, I don't want to be around this person. Because what if it's your mother? What if it's somebody super close to you and you say, every time I go over there, I leave and I'm upset for 2 days. I'm not going to go over there so much anymore. Well, your mom might tell you that's selfish. You're not choosing to spend your time with me. But that's self-interested because there's harm that's coming to you from that relationship. So people will say sometimes, when do I know that I need to set a boundary? I think it's usually pretty clear, but sometimes it's not. And I would say this, any person that you spend time around, that when you leave, you feel exhausted or hurt or misunderstood, you have a boundary problem. That person is taking something from you they don't deserve to take. And if you keep going back over and over again and not changing anything, it's self-harm. You're putting yourself in the line of fire. And why would you do that over and over and not change it? So listen to that little spidey sense that you get when you hang out with a friend and you're exhausted every single time. When you see a relative and you leave feeling judged or hurt. Those are people that you probably need to spend less time around. And when you spend that time, you need to have a boundary about what you talk about, how they treat you. And then it's a little bit of a shield. But the shield is not in the boundary itself, it's in the decisions you make about why that boundary is in place. So if we think about it, a person who casts doubt upon our opinions, a person who judges us, a person who makes us question our own memory or our own reality, that's not a safe person. That's a person that needs some boundaries. And that's when we start talking about toxic relationships. A lot of people will say it was a toxic relationship. Sometimes it's a toxic relationship because of you, because of the way you behave. A lot of things are often more about the other person and how they behave, right? That's why we call it toxic. They treated us in XYZ way. But if you stayed too long, you participated. You're not responsible. It's not your fault. But if we have something that we feel as a toxic relationship and we decide to stay, the only way we can stay is with a healthy boundary around how that person is allowed to treat us. So, what's the definition of a toxic relationship? A toxic relationship is where a person repeatedly hurts you, causes you dysfunction, causes you discomfort, and the relationship persists. That's what a toxic relationship is. So a relationship is usually a two-way street. If you allow it to persist, you're participating. So this is where talking to other people becomes really helpful, because a lot of times we'll know something doesn't feel right and it feels a little toxic, it feels a little off, but we won't really do anything about it because we wonder if it's us. Isolation is the way that manipulators win. If they convince you that you can't rely on your own memory or your own opinion, and you just keep listening, they've got you. But if you share with somebody, a friend, a therapist, a family member, and say, this person said this to me and it didn't feel okay, what do you think? You might get a better picture of what's actually happening. Because if a relationship is toxic, a lot of times we don't have the ability to see it, but we know it hurts. That's the danger of toxic relationships. We stay in them too long because we question ourselves, but we also don't see how bad it is sometimes until after. And I bet you could think about that, where you left a relationship or a friendship and afterwards you went, why did I do that to myself? Because you couldn't see it. You couldn't see your role in it. You couldn't see the boundaries you needed to put up. But I bet next time you did. I bet if somebody cheated on you and you had a terrible relationship, the next time you were in a relationship, you have protections in place to make sure that person's not going to be able to do that to you again, or hopefully not be able to do that to you again. But that's learning, and we learn. But in the moment, sometimes we need somebody else to help us to see. I've had people come to me and tell me things, and it's so obviously a toxic relationship. And when I say it, they go, oh, yeah, because they almost needed me to point it out. They didn't trust themselves. That's what people do when they manipulate you. They get you not to trust yourself. So, we're also going to talk a little bit about the other part of relationships called codependency, which can be a toxic relationship, but it's another part of relationship discussions in light of boundaries. Codependency is a word that people throw around a lot, but a lot of people don't really know what it means. Codependent relationships are relationships where the boundaries are not okay. They're not in the right place. Codependency happens not because you depend on a person. That's what people think it is, or you depend on them too much. Not really. It's more about another person's feelings and needs being more important than yours. So a codependent relationship can be a friend who doesn't want you to have other friends because they need you to be their best friend. Codependency can be a parent that relies on you way more when they could be a little more independent. So there are a lot of ways codependency shows up. It's basically where another person's feelings are more important than yours. So codependency could be that your partner doesn't want you going out with friends because they believe that you should want to spend all your time with them. Now, it's a it's a form of illness. It's a disordered thing, because relationships should be shared and should have boundaries and limits in them. But if they don't, they can become codependent and they can become toxic. And those things are traps that are very easy to get stuck in. And sometimes they're based on love, which is why it's so twisted. Is a toxic relationship sometimes can be somebody who loves you so much that they want to control everything. Codependency can be they love you so much that they just need you to do everything. But that's not love in the sense that we want love. Love is about empathy and understanding. And it's about somebody saying, I love you so much that I want you to be happy. Not I love you so much that I need you just to love me. So boundaries become important because if we don't set them, we end up in those kind of relationships, which don't always end well. When you try to break a codependency, the relationship changes and sometimes disintegrates. Because if that relationship is based on you meeting that person's needs, when you stop doing that, they're going to fall apart. So let's give an example of some boundaries, just so you can understand exactly what we're talking about here. Let's say that you have a partner and your partner really struggles when you spend time with your friends. Now, you've had these friends for a very long time, and you're a social person. You need to be with your friends. You need to spend time with them. You share an interest together. So it's really important to you to see your friends. And you really only see them twice a month, but it's something that's really important. And in your relationship, you notice right around the time, twice a month, when you go out with your friends, things are problematic in your relationship. That person, your partner, gets sullen. They get a little spiteful. They get a little mean, or they try to make you feel guilty. And you know it's because they don't like you being with your friends. And then you start to question it and go, well, maybe twice a month is too much. Well, I used to do it before this relationship 3 times a week. So I've already compromised, right? So they will have a series of negative behaviors around that in order to try to get you to stop doing it. They won't come out necessarily and say, don't go out with your friends, stay home with me because I want you here because I need you to love me the most. They're not really ever going to say that. It's a little more insidious than that. And they'll do it in a lot of different ways. And this is a great way for us to kind of go through some of the terms and apply them. So they may be passive aggressive. There's a term that we need boundaries around. They may be passive aggressive. Oh, just go out with your friends. Don't worry about me. Passive aggressive is I'm saying something to you, not saying it right out, but I'm going to say it and you're going to hear it. And it's aggressive. That's right in the name, passive aggressive. So instead of saying, don't go out with your friends, I'm saying, go out with your friends. I'll be fine. Very aggressive. That's what passive aggressive is. When you hear that, it's like a mean sarcasm. There's a fact in it, there's a truth in it. Call them out. What are you saying? Are you saying that you don't want me to go out with my friends? Well, I'm going to go out with my friends. This is important to me. There's the silent treatment. That's another sign that you need a boundary with someone. When the whole day that you're going out and the day after, they don't talk to you. They're sending a message. I'm okay. I'm fine. No, you're not fine. You're not talking to me. No, I'm good. And it's a way of saying, I'm really upset that you went out with your friends, but I'm not going to say it. Manipulation. Right before you get ready to go out, they suddenly have a horrible headache and they need you to stay home and take care of them. That's a manipulation. I'm not going to tell you I don't want you to go out, but I'm going to change your behavior to get what I want by using your emotions against you. That's the dangerous thing. When somebody manipulates you to get you to feel a certain way, I need you to pay attention to that. That's a boundary need right there. Gaslighting. You're always out with your friends. No, I'm not. I only go out with them twice a month. Well, they're more important than me, and you don't remember you've spent more time with them than you have with me. Well, no, I'm with you every day. No, that's not true. That's not true. If you add it all up, it's not true. And remember last year you used to go out every single week. Well, I didn't, right? So gaslighting is where somebody tells you that the reality is different than it is. Gaslighting is one we hear a lot about, and I want you to be careful. Don't use this too wrong. A lot of people use this wrong. Gaslighting is insidious. It is a nasty, deliberate behavior. There's a difference between misunderstanding or arguing about what happened and a person deliberately trying to extinguish your reality and make you question your sanity. Gaslighting is someone saying to you, you're wrong, you remember it wrong, you're crazy, I'm right, when they're lying to you. That's what gaslighting is. So if you see these behaviors, gaslighting, manipulation, silent treatment, passive aggressive, that person is trying to control you and needs a limit and a boundary. So how would we do it in that situation? How would we do it in that situation where you have decided that it's really important that you see your friends twice a month for just a few hours and you're not doing anything crazy? You're not doing anything in violation of the relationship. You just want to be with the people that you love. Do you want to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't want you to have something that's important to you? In this situation, this person's values say, my friends are important and they need to be in my life. That's their values. That is the absolute truth of who they are. So, in order to be with this person, they have to give that up or be subject to torture. The boundary is, I am going to do this. This is who I am. And you are not allowed to make me feel terrible about it. Now, sometimes what happens is a person grows. A person gets used to the idea. Maybe that partner wasn't used to somebody having anyone but them. And maybe they'll grow and maybe they'll change. But your boundary is, I am going to do this. And you are not going to be allowed to make me feel bad about it. So we say it in a calm, firm, clear way, just as you would set a rule in anything in your life. You would tell your child, you're not going to touch the stove because the stove is hot. And if you touch the stove, you will get burned and you will go to the hospital and it will be terrible. It's a boundary is, this is what is important to me. And often these are the consequences. So in that case, I would talk to that person and I would say, when you go home to your partner tonight, you're going to say that this is important to you and that this is not negotiable and that you have already adjusted. You don't do it every week anymore and you do it twice a week. And I'm going to continue because it's important to my values. And if you engage in any of these negative behaviors around it, we're going to have a problem in our relationship. And I need you to support me or at least be quiet. And if you don't, we are going to have to go to couples counseling because this could end our relationship. So there's the boundary. This is what I don't want. This is what I'm going to do. I'm allowed to do it. And if you don't work with me here or grow with me here where I need you to grow, we're probably not going to be together. That's an extreme version of a boundary. But sometimes it's not that intense or even that hard, and it can change your life. I have a person who has a lot of sort of people around them that drain him, people that call on him night and day because he's very kind and he's very giving. And he has a friend that will call every night and keep him on the phone for hours. And meanwhile, he's exhausted when he gets off the call and he's giving. And this friend is not there for him. This friend is not helping him in any way, not contributing to the friendship. And his boundary that we've talked about setting is, I'm not going to talk on the phone with that person for long periods of time. And eventually we got to the point where it was, we're not going to talk on the phone. Because every time the phone call came, he couldn't set a boundary to end the call. He knew what his limit was. His limit was about 10 minutes into the call, he was done. But he couldn't set a boundary that he was uncomfortable with the 3-hour phone call. And he just suffered. So this person now is giving away 3 hours of their precious life and time for someone who just takes it. A boundary was needed. So the boundary at first was, I don't really like phone calls that much, and I'm always going to be here for you. I'm your friend. but after about a half an hour, I'm going to need to get off the call. Well, the person fought against the boundary. Well, why not? You've always talked to me for 3 hours. This person was codependent on him. I need to talk to you every night to get through my day the next day because I've processed everything. This was all about the friend's needs and not about the needs on the other person, on the other person on the other end of the phone. So the boundary was, you can call me every night, but only for half an hour. And then the person upped the ante and would get really dramatic at the half hour point. So that wasn't working. Then it became, you can only really call me 3 nights a week. And then they still called every night. And eventually we had to get to the point where it was, I'm not going to talk to you on the phone anymore. I'll come see you on Sundays and I'll be there from 4 to 6. But that's all I can give right now because my life is really busy. That boundary changed that person's life. He got his time back. He got his peace back. But what happened was the other person lost out. But the other person was taking more than they should have in the first place. So when you think about people in your life, think about, who are you giving too much to? And what pattern have you created by allowing yourself to be taken advantage of? And it can be the dumbest little things. If, there's a household task that you just always do, and you just do it every time. If you take the trash out, and you always take the trash out, the trash will pile up if you don't take it out, and nobody else will do it because you've established a pattern that that's what you do. And then when you're sick and you're tired and the trash is all over the floor and nobody picks it up, they don't think about it, the other people in the house, because you've always done it. You're going to do it. But that's when you have to speak up and say, maybe this isn't just my job. Maybe I need a boundary around this. Maybe I don't do all of this all of the time. So it can be a small thing or a big thing, but it can be really life-changing. So you do have to sit with inside of yourself, what are my values and how do I want to live? There's a thing I tell people who struggle with boundaries in a big way, that from birth to death, it is you. You are the constant. You are born as a person, a whole person, and you die as a whole person. And through the course of your life, you will have many people come in and out of your life. Let's face it, our parents go out of our lives. Our siblings are pretty regular. They stay for the most part. But our relationships come and go, our friendships, sometimes our partnerships. Through the course of our life, the one constant is us. We are the person we are born into. We are the person we die with. We are the constant. Do you really want other people who may be a blip on the radar screen, who may be in and out of your life, to determine your path or your happiness or your sanity? And it's okay to say, I've been in abusive relationships. I have been in abusive relationships. It's okay to say that and say, I made a mistake. I stayed too long, or I didn't know better. And that's really terrible. But I won't make that mistake again because I understand the value of my life and the importance of my control over my situation and the ability to have a say in what happens to me. I think a lot of this comes from the fact that we're born dependent. For the first 18, 20 years of our lives, our parents are kind of in charge of us. They tell us everything, what to eat, what to dress in. They buy everything. Sometimes that lasts even a little longer if they're paying for you to go to college or if they have a really strong influence. And we learn to be subservient to the needs of others, as we should be. When we're children, we don't know what to do. We need people to guide us and to show us what to do. But the problem is then we become adults. And in our 20s, we start to go, I can do that. I could do that. And we start to have all of these remarkable awakenings for all the things we can do. And we learn. But the problem is for some of us, it's real easy to stay in that role where somebody else can tell us how life is or how life should be. And when we stay in that role, we get told what to do, or we get controlled or managed. And it's not always abusive. Sometimes, if we're just a little more passive, the person who's more dominant runs the show. And maybe you're okay with that, or maybe you're not. I've seen people who get married and leave the finances up to the other person in the marriage and never look at it, never know what's going on, never care. And then one day they wake up and they have no control. They have no ability to even make a decision because they don't know what the money is. That's a case where your passivity or your ability to not make a decision or have control could actually hurt you. You need to be in control. You need to know what's going to happen to you, and you need to manage it and share it. Think of every relationship as a transactional one. Transactional is not a bad word here. People use it in a different way often. But transactional means that I give to you and you give to me in relatively equal measure. Boundaries encourage that. The crazy thing is that we don't learn how to do this like so many other things. And we don't really talk about this in any kind of formal way. But yet we assume when we get into relationships that we're going to know what all the boundaries are. And we don't. The healthiest relationships are ones that talk about boundaries even before there's a problem. And we just don't do that. But I think we should. I think some of us are better at this in the workplace, where we'll say, I can only work until 5 o'clock because I got to pick up my kids. That's a boundary. You're pretty clear about that right from the beginning. You're not going to take a job that you can't do. But in relationships, we just assume it's going to flow. We assume we're going to figure it out. And we don't, because we don't have the same values and limits and all of that. And part of getting to know somebody is knowing what those limits are. That's why I think dating is so important. We need to date people for real before we commit to them. We need to see how they behave in their homes, how they make choices about their life, what their limits are. Do they only believe in going out to dinner once a month, but you're a foodie and you want to go out? They have a limit, and they might even have a boundary around that. You need to understand why. Maybe you'll be okay with only going out once a month if you understand the reason why. Everybody has limits, but we're not really talking about them. And a lot of it is because our definitions are different, our values are different. I'll use the most classic example in relationships. The definition of infidelity is a broad one. And how do you define that? How does your partner define that? Well, that's a boundary you better be very clear on, because if your partner has a friend that you are concerned about because it's an ex, you better make sure that your boundaries around that are pretty clear. I'm okay if they talk to their exes. It doesn't bother me. Okay, fine. Are you okay with they go out with their exes to the movies? Right? What's the limit? What's the boundary? And infidelity is one that I really like as an example, because there are people who believe infidelity is talking to someone who they could potentially be interested in. So if I'm a girl and a boy talks to me, that's infidelity. And I've seen that in relationships where a husband says to his wife, you may not have male friends because that's unfaithful. I've seen people who have even said this in therapy, where you can't go to a therapist because you're telling them things you don't tell me. That's being unfaithful. Or some people who say, I don't care if you flirt, just don't sleep with them. That's a broad bunch of definitions for infidelity. We all have one. You do. Think about what you consider infidelity, where that line is for you. Just think about it for a second, right? I bet you and your partner might be pretty close on that, or you might not be. But it would be terrible to find that out the hard way. I had a couple once where the wife developed a friendship on the football field with the father of another player. And she developed a very close friendship with this man. And her husband discovered the texts. Now, the texts were not sexual, but they were texting every night and they were sharing emotional details. And he was devastated, the husband. And he said, "This is infidelity. This is an emotional affair." And she just kept saying, "I didn't sleep with him. I didn't, we didn't do anything sexual." She didn't believe she was doing anything wrong, but the husband viewed it as infidelity. Now, who's right and who's wrong? That's up to them to figure out. But if they had had a clear knowledge of the boundary around that, that situation would have ended differently. Because maybe his boundary was, "I don't want you texting emotional things to another man." And she would be able to work through that with him and decide what they agreed upon. So boundaries are sometimes even about definitions. What's the belief and value that we share and how do we define it? Define it. Friends are a good example, or a previous example about going out with friends. I've talked to a lot of women who really struggle with their husbands having male friends because they fear that they're out doing things that the single males want to do, right? He's out with his friends and they're all single and he's married. What's he doing out there? So it's like, okay, what is your real boundary? Is your boundary about him having friends, or is the boundary about you trying to control something because of your fear? See how complex that is? So if she just says, "I don't want you seeing your friends anymore," she's not addressing the real issue. So boundaries are about self-care, but they're also about honesty. And that's a really good thing to be able to say to somebody, "When you do this, I feel this. So we have to negotiate where the limit is. Where does that change for us?" Very important. Also important for our own emotional regulation. Because if I can't set a boundary and my husband goes out and I worry, I've just ruined my day. I've probably ruined the next day, and I've affected my relationship. My emotional regulation is off because I can't set a boundary. Not good. So all that kindness and empathy that I have goes out the window. And then we forget what's really important. What's really important is not that you control what he does when he's out. What's really important is that you're able to be clear about what you need to be okay, what you really need. What do you really need in that situation? Reassurance, honesty. That's all. There's a poem I really like about kindness. And I'm bringing it up here because kindness is the thing that we don't associate with boundaries. And I need you to. People think boundaries are these things that you do to put someone in line. Mm-mm. Boundaries are about being kind to yourself and taking care of yourself so that you can be kind in the world and to that person. So the poem is called Small Kindnesses by Danusha Lamaris. I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull up their legs to let you by, or how strangers still say "bless you" when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our coffee hot and to say thank you to the person handling it, to smile at them and for them to smile back at us. For the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire, only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, "Here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat." I really like that poem because it's these basic human things that we do inherently and easily. If somebody in front of you drops their lemons, you're gonna bend over and inherently help them. Boundaries take us back to that place where I can just be me and be the kind of kind, giving person I want to be. And if we feel safe and in control, we're not sitting around worrying about things. We're just being us. That's why certain relationships in your life feel really good because the boundaries are probably clear and you don't have to have a battle to get what you want, or you're not being manipulated or controlled. And one of the poisonous things that happens to us is that we lose track of whether our boundaries are reasonable or not. So that's why I go back to talk about it with somebody and say it out loud, because it is reasonable to be self-oriented. It is reasonable to have an expectation that you get to live your life and your path from start to finish. And one of the things I wanted to talk briefly about was the idea of narcissism, because there is so much out there now. Everybody has been with a narcissist, or everybody is married to a narcissist, or has narcissistic damage. The word's even hard to say. And the truth of it is that true narcissism is actually pretty rare because it's a disorder. It's a personality disorder. It's not as common as you would think, because true narcissism is a complete lack of empathy, the lack of ability to connect how somebody else feels and to care about it. And true narcissism is very, very dangerous because that person does not care, does not love in a healthy way, because it's only about them. Now, a lot of you will probably say, "Oh, well, that person, he or she was narcissistic. They didn't care about anything but themselves." Sometimes I find that people have narcissistic tendencies, and these tendencies are fed by a person who is empathic and kind. One of the most lethal combinations is a narcissistic person and an empathic person, because the narcissistic person will take and the empathic person will give. But boundaries are a surefire way to figure out, is this a tendency that a person has fallen into, or a pattern because they just don't know better? Or are they really a narcissistic person and toxic to us in general? And there is a way to tell. There is one way that you will know, and that is by setting boundaries. If you set boundaries and that person cannot conceive of them, will not obey them, and you are working incessantly to hold them, you may be dealing with that rare person who is truly narcissistic and incapable of change, and who is probably not healthy for you. If it's a family member or a friend, you build distance. If it's a partnership, it's going to take a lot to make that work. Not impossible, but it's going to take some real work. But your boundaries are a good way to see if a person is willing to grow with you. Because maybe that person that didn't want you out with your friends is just really insecure in their attachment to you. Maybe they're afraid that you're going to like someone better than them. And maybe that's not about toxic narcissism, but maybe their own insecurities and their fears and their love. They're not acting right about it, and it looks like narcissism, but maybe they're just afraid you're going to leave. And the fear of rejection and abandonment is a huge, huge force in a lot of relationships. Think about that in your own. What does the fear of rejection and abandonment make you do? So, if you suspect you are with somebody who is narcissistic, then you set your boundaries, you set your limits, and you see what happens. Now, granted, when you set a rule around something, people are always going to rebel. They're always going to be shocked when you say, "Why do I have to take the trash out all the time?" Well, you always do. Don't take the first reaction to your boundary setting, to a rule setting you set for yourself, because the first reaction is that you're breaking a chain and you're breaking a pattern. And that's hard to do. It's hard for everybody. It was hard for you to say it, it's hard for them to hear it. But their first reaction is not indicative necessarily of what's going to happen. And once you start making that boundary, you hold it. And that's the secret. Setting the boundary is only half of it. Holding the boundary is where you get your success. A quick example is I had someone who had 2 children under 2, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and her husband had a very, very big, high-pressure job. So her self-care went out the window. When he came home, she didn't want to ask him to do anything because he was making all the money. But she was really having a hard time, and she wasn't getting a shower. She was feeling really bad about herself. And it's a human right to have a shower. So we started saying the boundary is when he comes home, after he settles in, that you get 1 hour. And in that hour, you can take a shower, you can breathe, you can be away from those 2 little babies for a minute. And she said it to him, I want an hour every night. And he rebelled. Well, I just got home from work and I'm exhausted and I don't get to see you. And he had a million reasons why it wasn't a good idea. And she said, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's important. She did it. And he was a little grumpy about it the first week. Did you enjoy your hour? Passive aggressive. And then eventually he saw that she started to look better. She started to feel better. She started to do more because that basic hour gave her back a piece of herself, her path. And eventually it worked and it was fine. And she took that hour. She continues to take that hour. And that boundary saved her from so many things that she was suffering with. He didn't want to give it to her. And she needed it. And it was the right thing to do. And he fought it. But she did it anyway. That's what I'm going to tell you about whatever boundaries you need in your relationships. You're going to get a fight. They're not going to want things to change. But you making that change changes your experience. That you from birth to death that you live in, that body you live in, that life you live in. You are equally as important to the person that you're setting the boundary with. Take up half the space and ask for what you want. If you're tired and you need rest, ask for that. If you need to be out of the house, ask for that. If you need things to be more equal, ask for that. And once you ask, no matter what they say or how they react, you negotiate where you need to, but you hold your ground. And if you start to doubt yourself, you ask a friend or your therapist or somebody, am I asking too much? Are they being unreasonable? And if you see those negative behaviors, the passive aggressive, the silent treatment, all of that stuff, the manipulation, I want you to use those words. I think you might be trying to manipulate me right now. I think what you said was a little passive aggressive, and I'd like you to say what you really think. Call that stuff out because that's a part of this conversation too. And okay, so if the worst happens and that relationship has to end, you're better for it. Do you want to be in a relationship with someone who manipulates you and hurts you because they need to feel good? Boundaries will be the test for that, won't they? So, we're going to go over really quick 4 little types of boundaries I want you to think about when we're talking about where we're going to set them. There are physical boundaries, emotional, time boundaries, and material boundaries. Physical is your personal space. How close can people be to you? Intimacy, how much are you giving of yourself sexually or just in affection? That's your physical boundaries. Emotional boundaries, how much are you taking on other people's feelings? If someone has a problem, it's their problem. You can help with it, but don't make it your problem. Time boundaries, this is a big one. How much are you giving of your precious time, the commodity we cannot get more of? Time boundaries. And material boundaries. This is your stuff, your money. Are you giving your lawnmower to the neighbor and he's wearing it out? Maybe there needs to be a boundary. Are you giving money to someone over and over again? So think about those types of boundaries, and are you being abused or not correctly managing those boundaries? Um, People will grow if they want to. Set the boundaries. See if people grow. Give them the opportunity to grow. The goal of this is to give you authenticity, to give you peace, to give you control in a healthy way, that you get to be you in the way you want to be you. Whether that's going out with your friends or getting a little bit of extra time or not taking on things that don't belong to you or not giving too much. These are the things that will overwhelm you if you don't keep them in line. This is about your mental health. This is about the way you want to live your life. We have to be self-oriented. You have to save yourself before you can save anyone else. You can give to your kids over and over again, but if you aren't taking care of yourself, you can't give to your kids. So think about what boundaries you need around self-care as well. So our book for today is The Boundary Book That Will Transform Your Life. Very ambitious title, by the way. It's a good book. It's not that good, but it's a good book. But it's The Boundary Book That Will Transform Your Life by Angela Hoyos. And it's a very short book and it's a very easy read. And I picked this for a reason, that you can get this on Amazon super cheap. And somebody could read this in about 2 hours. And I got it because if you have somebody in your life that you're struggling with around boundaries, you could have a discussion and you could share this book, because this book could help sort of edify the conversation. It's not just me. See, this is what other people say about boundaries too. And it's a quick read and it's an easy discussion. So it's not an in-depth thing, but it's something that you can use as a tool to maybe share this conversation with them. So for next time, it is to be determined. We are working on a couple of very, very good ideas. But I'm going to keep it a secret for now. So we're not sure which way we're going to go yet, but I can promise you that it will be something relatable and something to take you to the next step on your self-care journey. So, for all of my sunshines, I'm so glad that you're here and you continue to be here and that more of you are here, and it is wonderful and I'm so grateful. So, what I want you to do is to go out and find the sunshine and don't give it up for anybody. You can share it, but don't give up more than you should. And I will see you next time. Bye.